Hey, what's up, everybody? Thank you so much for watching all the videos that we've been posting lately about the gameplay, as well as just Runes of Evid in general, helping everyone to be able to learn the game at their own pace. And honestly, getting this stuff out there ahead of time, ahead of the game's release, just to help introduce people to the characters, the world, the way the game works, etc. And I lately have been doing Archetype 101 post where I just do PowerPoints and just do a brief and description through text. But today I just want to go ahead and just do a video focusing around Marvels. Marvels is one of the more powerful factions within Runes of Ede. They have really strong characters with strong effects, and they're the oldest known harnessers of the actual Runes of Ede. Based on the storyline, they also suffered a catastrophic defeat towards the beginning of the storyline of Runes of Ede. Since they were the first known users of the runes themselves, they actually ended up being attacked by Draxa and actually had to defend the planet of Ede in order to be able to stop Draxa from completely destroying the planet. They ended up walking away, but only a few of them ended up walking away alive, and that was Jed, who was left to take care of the rest of the marvels that were left over. And so the whole entire archetype is around that combat driven, strongly focused in, a nice turn progression, having solid threes and fours and fives, and ultimately playing really strong units that can go over the top of the opponent. And all the while, you'll be harnessing the Marvel keyword, which is might, which is whenever you win a fight or whenever you win a battle in combat, your unit gets a permanent plus 1000 buff for the duration of the game. And so this means that your units are going to be really strong offensively. They'll be even stronger defensively. And as the game goes on, it tends to go towards your favor because you're built for the late game when you're playing Marvels. So anyway, let's just dive right into the Marvels. So first thing was the Marvel runes. So of course in Runes of Ede, you have 18 runes in your stockpile, which can consist of 9 basic runes, and then you can play up to 9 ancient runes. You can play 3 copy of any given ancient rune in your stockpile, and all of your ancient runes have a broken effect. Broken means that when it is taken in damage, so flip from your stockpile into the damage area, you get to resolve its effect immediately without paying its cost. This is huge because this means that the opponent does not get an opportunity to respond to it. This isn't something that goes on a stack or gets activated. This effect resolves immediately. It is optional, of course, if you think it's something that's detrimental to you, but you do have the ability to resolve that effect immediately without paying its cost if it's broken in damage. And then each of them also have the ability to just pay for the effect itself during any one of your main phases. In Runes of Ede, your turn structure consists of a startup, which means readying all your units, readying all your runes, and then choosing up to one card from the top of your stockpile and flipping it into resource area, and then drawing a card. You then have your first main phase, you then have the combat phase. After the combat phase, you have your second main phase, and then you have your end phase. And so at any point during your main phases, you can pay to use these effects, and each of them are meant to be something that's powerful, has high utility, and offers you something that you can do throughout any stage of the game to have an impact on the game. That's probably one of the coolest parts about Runes of Ede is that since the games end up being very mid-range focused, you have the ability to, as the game goes on, use your resource area almost like a second hand, since they offer you some sort of effect that you can use right away, or get you some sort of kind of card advantage or virtual card advantage, or disrupt the opponent. So the runes are probably the most important thing about the game, and honestly is what sets us apart from any of the other games that are currently out there right now using similar systems. When looking at the Marvels, there's a couple of cards that are like linchpins of the actual faction itself, and Call of the Marvels is one of those. Call of the Marvels is a 2-cost event, one specified Marvel rune that is quick, and that means you can play it at any time. And this is important because you can see the lightning indicators both by event as well as in the middle of the effect box. At any time you can use this card. And this is really strong because at the end of your opponent's turn, if you have your 2 runes ready, you can go ahead and exhaust them, cast your Call of the Marvels, and go ahead and get that 2-drop. And it almost gives it like pseudo flash, which means it can interplay. And since it's entering on your opponent's turn, when you go to your turn, you'll then be able to attack with that unit. But it's also more important because it's what's going to be getting you your high impact, high utility, lower cost runes. For instance, Barret Marvel Icon is a 2-drop that comes into play, and when it comes into play, it gets to fight target unit that costs 2 or less. So that means it can fight an opponent's unit that is either weaker or has the same exact power, and then you can get that off the board. If it is a unit that has less power, well then you'll win that fight, and then you actually then get to trigger Might. And as you can see here with the reminder text, the first time each turn this unit destroys another unit, put a plus 1000 power counter on it. So again, something that gives you a lot of utility in the early game, whether if you're behind, ahead, great card. And then ultimately, the card you're really searching for is Mado, Mado the Giver. And Mado has a constant effect, which means that this effect is always ongoing and says you may exhaust this unit as if it were a Marvel rune, and that this unit can't be targeted while it's ready. So this is very important because Marvels, like I said, like to get towards the later parts of the game and play their more powerful units. Mado helps accelerate that by allowing you a card that can't be interacted with by the opponent as long as it's in ready mode, and then when it exhausts, you can actually choose to exhaust it to help pay the cost of something. So again, you play this on turn 2, you can play a 4 cost unit on turn 3, and it keeps you ahead of the game and gets you to your powerful units faster. Then, of course, you have some very strong one drops with Jacob leading the fight. Jacob is probably, he's the inspirational leader of the group. He's not the strongest. He doesn't have the best keywords, and he is not the best when it comes to harnessing the runes themselves. But he has these very powerful effects that help shape a game, whether it's entering play or whether it's one of his constant effects. Jacob is someone that always has an impact on all the games that you're playing. Then, of course, we have Rhea, which Rhea is a very strong unit, whether it be playing in the early game, playing in the late game. Critical is probably one of the most important keywords within Runes of Ede. Each faction has access to it, and critical means that when you deal damage to your opponent, you break runes from their stockpile, you're going to break 2 instead of 1 if the unit goes unblocked. If the opponent partially blocks the attack, which means, let's say, Rhea is at 2000 power, the opponent blocks with a 1000 power unit, you're still going to deal 1 damage to the opponent if it's partially blocked. So the only way to stop yourself from taking damage from a critical attack is by completely blocking it, so making sure that your powers align. So Call of the Marvels, that's that package that this unit relies on to kind of get the game going and get those key pieces. And additionally, just provides you a way to get some early offense or just early defense or getting that ramp effect, which is so important. The next stage, how do the Marvels win? 2 things: the ability to generate extra resources, and then going over the top of the opposing faction with much larger, more powerful units. And that's demonstrated with, let's say here, almost a perfect curve in a sense, or a curve in general. So on your 4th turn playing Jed Marvel Caretaker. Jed Marvel Caretaker is a mythic unit. Mythic units are really cool because they have 3 specific effects that you can activate at any time during one of your main phases or in response to something. So for instance, during your main phase, if you have Jed Marvel Caretaker in play, you can pitch another copy of him to just draw 2 cards, right? So if you have a Jed Marvel Caretaker in play, you have 1 in hand and it's just sitting in your hand, you can pitch it to then draw 2 cards. Or if Jed Marvel Caretaker is targeted and you have another copy in your hand by an effect, so if your opponent uses like a kill spell or a destroy spell or something that stops it, you can then pitch a copy of itself to stop that from happening. And then, of course, lastly, when you're going to play the unit and you're worried that your opponent might counter it, so let's say they have a counter spell, you can actually pitch a copy of the unit while you're playing it to stop it from being countered. And one thing they note about this mythic effect is you can only use it once per game in total. So though you may see multiple units that have that mythic attribute, you can only use that once per game total. So whether if it's on your Jed Marvel Caretaker, on your Jed Awakened Marvel, it's a once per game effect. Then of course Jed has critical, and then most importantly he has a play effect. Target unit control with cost 3 or less gains plus 1000 power until the end of the turn, then fights another unit. So again, giving you access to removal, helping beef up your stronger units to keep the board stabilized. And then an even more powerful effect when this card is removed. So that means if this card leaves play for any reason, whether if it dies in battle, dies from a removal spell, gets removed from the game, you'll then put the top rune of your stockpile into play exhausted. Next we have Kelchin Overpowering Assault, who has Might, and then a constant effect, the unit doesn't exhaust to attack, and then you may exhaust this unit as if it were a Marvel rune. Very similar to that Mado we saw on the first slide. You can see here Kelchin also kind of plays into that. Also, fun fact, Kelchin is based off of the Jose Mercado. This is Jose's card, and Kelchin is actually a Marvel Ancient, in which the Ancients I went over in Facebook posts before, they are extensions of the great creator Elix that created this universe, and they represent, of course, each individual has very specific characteristics of Elix themselves, and Kelchin is just a very brave, strong warrior who's very methodical, very thoughtful, and that's why you can see here doesn't exhaust to attack, and then also he can use himself and exhaust himself as if he were a Marvel rune to help you get to the late game. And you have Mac, Marvel General, one of the oldest Marvels. He is a general of their actual army itself, and then he has a strong effect play. This unit fights target unit. If that unit is destroyed, this unit fights another target unit. So again, you can take 2 weaker units off the board, and you do have might. So the first time you end up destroying a unit, you actually get that plus 1000 buff permanently, which is pretty awesome. And then lastly, you have Jed Awaken Marvel. Jed is the leader of the faction. He is so hurt and distraught over what happened in the great battle against Draxa that his power has been dormant for so long. And it takes, honestly, a lot to get him to this point where he's willing to unleash his full potential and unleash his full strength. And it comes in the Battle of Eos, in the battle at the Perfect City where the Savages are overrunning the city, and Jed feels like he has no other choice but to unlock this power. And you can see that with his really strong effects. He's an 8 cost unit. He's a mythic unit, of course, has might, and then a strong keyword that's only tied to Marvels, Devastate. Devastate, similar to critical, except when it's unblocked, it deals 3 damage, and if it's partially blocked, it still deals 2 damage, which is incredibly strong. And then play, destroy all other units. And one thing you'll notice about some of the effects in Runes of Eden is that this card, for instance, has a lock next to that play effect. That means if there's a lock next to an effect, that means that effect has to happen. It's not optional. Whereas all the other units you see that have, let's say, Mac Marvel General just has play without the lock there, that means the effect is optional. So Jed's first play effect is not optional. You have to destroy all other units, including your own. And then a constant ability, this unit can't be targeted while it's ready. So that means Jed can just sit there and just continue to block, continue to gain power via might before going for a swing. But once you swing, you do become vulnerable. So keep that in mind. Next thing to go over is, of course, the the characters that fill out the curve, and honestly probably one of the cards that's like a linchpin of the faction itself, which is Clash of the Titans. Clash of the Titans is an event that you can only play in your main phase. As you can see, it's not quick, so you can only play it during your main phase, and you put a plus 1000 power counter on target unit control, then that unit fights another target unit, so that plus 1000 power counter is permanent. So something important to note. So it's a great way to either beef up your units in the early game, or in the late game if you top deck this, or restore this with one of the Marvel runes. You then get a really strong removal spell that you can target an opponent's character with. Next, we have Bale Steadfast. Bale is another mythic unit that has might, has critical, and has a really strong effect here. Whether you're attacking or defending, you get to draw 1 card. So if you declare him as attacker or you declare him as a blocker, you get to draw 1, which is just a very strong effect throughout the course of the game, and makes Bale always have an instant target on his back. Bale is, again, one of the other key characters within Runes of Ede, and he is, younger. He's more passionate. He wants to get into the fight right away. He wants to make sure that he can stop whatever is taking place on Eos right now, and always is at odds with Jed, because Jed, who protected Bale as a young kid, especially after the battle against Draxa, and cared for him, Bale has always noticed that sensitive side to Jed and just wants him to finally unleash it. And of course, Bale is that character who's just a strong warrior, brave, wants to fight, is driven by improvement and competition. So this unit definitely captures that. When he's in battle, whether he's attacking or defending, he gives you some sort of advantage. So again, always has a target on his back. You have Barrett the Vanquisher, which is critical, and then play, which is this is a really strong effect. Play, look at the top 3 cards of any stockpile, then place them back in any order. This means that you play it, look at the top 3 cards of either your stockpile or your opponent, you place it back in any order, which means that you can set up your own ancient runes to potentially take a damage when your opponent attacks you on the next turn. Or if your opponent, let's say your opponent is playing, a multicolor faction, they're playing, mystics and intellects, and you want to throw them off of what's going to get placed in the resource area next turn, you can manipulate the top 3 cards of their stockpile, or you can make it so you can clear the way. So if you know that there's an ancient rune on top, you can move it, and then that way you can just attack freely without having to worry about triggering it. You then have Kelchin, another card. is play. Target unit gets plus 1,000 power and might until end of turn. Kelchin again is one of the ancients. It's based off of Jose's Mercado, and then again comes into play and just gives an instant bonus to another character on the field. Then we have Foz Unrelenting. This is based off of the Frisco Foz, which if you don't know Frisco, Frisco is all about value. He's all about just straight up, I want my money right now, and I just want a strong, card that kind of does it all. And Foz does that. Foz is a unit with might, so whenever he destroys a unit via battle, or just in general, he's going to get a permanent plus 1,000 power buff and has a constant. The unit doesn't have to exhaust to attack. So he can attack and then also get a block, so he can trigger might on both turns, which is just very strong. And then he's a 4,000 power unit for 4 cost, which is again very good in this game, very good rate, very strong, powerful stats. Then you have Bale Transcendent Marvel, which is the upgraded version of Bale 3. This is Bale fighting. He's in the midst of battle. He's has his armor. He's bulked up. He's already harnessed might, as you can see. And then the first time each turn a unit you control breaks a rune, draw 1. Then you may destroy target unit with cost 3 or less. So that means the first time you deal a damage to your opponent once he's in play, you get to draw a card, then destroy target unit with cost 3 or less, which you can just totally tear apart your opponent's board with this effect. So very strong. And then you have Joko, another Marvel Ancient. The second Marvel Ancient has removed. So that means when he leaves play for any reason, you can revive target unit with cost 3 or less and put a plus 1,000 power counter on that unit. And that is it for the Marvel faction. Some things to keep in mind. You can only play 3 copies of a given unit in your archive. And then, like I said before, you can only play 3 copies of any ancient rune in your stockpile. And deck size is minimum 40 cards. So what you're going to notice in deck building in this game is that you're going to be pushed past that 40 a lot of the time, getting to 42, 44, etc. And I'm really excited about the future of the game and, of course, the future of this faction, which we're already working on some new cards right now. And we're very excited to get this to print, get this in your hands so you can test. But in the meantime, make sure you get those print and plays printed out. Build this faction. Mess around with it, learn it. It's a ton of fun to play. The game is awesome. And like I said, I'm really excited to bring it to the masses. So anyway, thank you all so much for everything, for watching. If you sat here and stuck it out long enough, make sure to check out the Discord if you're looking for a community of like-minded individuals to hang out with. And also, just be well. Thanks for watching the video. Thanks for supporting the game. Anyway, okay, thanks. Bye!